In today's lesson, we will be factoring trinomials again, but this time we're going to use both methods of either adding or subtracting the outer and inner terms. So the form will be in this form, x squared plus or minus bx. So the b term again is like the 10 here, so this is a minus 10. And here the b term is positive 3. Now this time the c term could either be a positive or a negative c. And so you'll see that with these first three problems are when we have the negative c term. The last three problems here have the positive c term. So we'll see the difference between the two. And we talked about it the last couple of days. So let's take a look at the first problem here. Here we're looking for the first two numbers need to multiply to make x squared. So we automatically know x and x make x squared. So we always go over to this last digit sign, and whenever this is negative, that tells us that we have opposite signs. So opposite signs mean that we are going to end up subtracting the outside-inside terms. So we want those outer terms and inner terms. We're going to end up taking the difference of those two. So one's going to be negative, one's going to be positive. We just don't know which one quite yet. But we know we want a 3 when we do this, or when we do this subtraction. We want 3x. So what we need to do is start thinking of numbers that multiply to make 108. And if you look at the digits, 1, 0, and 8, if you sum those digits, it makes 9. So that means 9 goes into this number. So 9 times 12 ends up making 108. And so we could also think of some other numbers if we weren't sure here. We could break these numbers down and start thinking of other values. But let's just look at this one to start with. The outer and inner terms need to subtract to make 3. And 9 minus 12 does make 3. So let's use those numbers. 9 and 12 inside the two binomials. And let's go ahead and figure out which sign goes where. We know they're opposite signs because they need to multiply to make a negative 108. So let's go ahead and do this. And in order to make this a positive 3, though, I want to make sure I have more positives and less negatives. And you see, now I have to subtract because they're opposite in sign. And when I do that, I end up with this positive 3x. So that tells me that 9 needs to be negative, 12 needs to be positive, and we'll have our answer. So there it is, x minus 9 and an x plus 12. Well, let's take a look at the next one. Similar situation, because that last digit sign is negative. Whenever that's negative, that means we have opposite signs. So opposite signs mean that we're going to end up subtracting. And so when we subtract, we're going to be subtracting the outer and inner terms. We just don't know which one we should subtract. One of these is going to be negative, and one of them will be positive. And when we do that subtraction, we'll end up with a negative 10x. That's what the middle term says. So from there, we can go ahead and draw our parentheses, put in our x and x that multiply to make x squared, and let's start thinking of some factors that make 56. Well, the ones I think of are 8 and 7. But I know 8 and 7 aren't going to work because those don't subtract to make 10. So what we need to do is we need to break these numbers down. Break that 8 down to 4 times 2 and bring down the 7. Now you can break the 4 down as well, but let's just try this to start with. Let's take the 2 and the 7 and let's group those two numbers. That makes 14 when we multiply them. So 14 times 4 also makes 56. Do those subtract to make 10? Yeah, they do. Take 4 from 14, it makes 10. So we got the right numbers. Well, if we didn't get the right numbers, we'd just continue to regroup the numbers. So we could have done 4 times 7. And 4 times 7 is 28. 28 times 2 makes 56 as well. So you just keep on working until you find the ones that work. And so we take a look at those outside terms. We take a look at the inside terms. Here we have 4x. Outside make 14x. And those numbers do subtract to make 10. Now, how do I make it a negative 10? Well, that means I need more negatives than positives. So I put the plus sign with the 4, minus sign with the 14. And then I would have it. And you see how the 14 times by, or the negative 14 times by 4 is going to make that negative 56. So we've got our answer, x plus 4, and we've got an x minus 14. Well, here's another situation. We've got a 45 this time, a negative 45. So whenever that last digit sign is negative, that tells us we have opposite signs. And opposite signs mean that we're going to end up subtracting the outer and inner terms. And when we do that, we're going to get a 12, a positive 12. So that tells us that we needed more positives than negatives as well. So we go ahead and start by drawing our two sets of parentheses. And then we put in our first term, x and x make x squared. And now we start thinking of those factors that make 45. And the ones that come to my mind are 9 and 5. But we don't want them to add. We want them to subtract to make 12. And they don't. They make 4. So we know those aren't the right numbers. But what we can do is we can break that 9 down to 3 times 3. Bring that 5 down, and these are the factors that make up 45. And so what we can do is regroup these numbers. Let's take this 3 and the 5 and group those. That makes 15. Bring down this 3, and those two numbers, 3 and 15, multiply to make 45. Now, do they subtract to make 12? Yes, they do. So those are the right numbers. We just need to figure out which sign goes where. So let's take a look at those. Outside terms make 15x. The inside terms, those make 3x. And when I do that subtraction, I end up with a 12x. Well, how do I get it to be a positive 12? That means I need more positives than negatives. So I'll put the minus sign with the 3, the plus sign with the 15, and it works out. So let's go ahead and rewrite what we've got. An x minus 3 times by an x plus 15. And again, if you had the other way of writing it, the commutative property allows us to do that. So x plus 15 times by x minus 3 is exactly the same answer. Well, let's take a look at the next 3 problems. They're a little different. What makes them different? The sign in front of the last term. It's a positive. That means we have the same sign. And if we have the same sign, that means the outside terms and the inside terms are adding together this time. Now, what do they end up making? They make a positive 18. So that means both signs are positive. That's the nice thing about having the last digit sign as a positive. We know what the signs are by looking at that last or the middle digit, the b term. When we know x and x are the numbers that multiply to make x squared, we know that the outside and inside terms add together to make a positive 18. So let's see what they could be. Well, the numbers I think of are 4 and 8. Those multiply to make 32, but they only add to make 12. That means we need to get the numbers further apart. So let's do this. Let's take this 8 and this 4 and break it down at 2 times 2. Now, 2 times 2, we could break down the 8 to make like 4 times 2, but see, 2 times the 4, well, that just makes 8, and then I have the same 2 times 2 makes 4, so I need to regroup it a little bit differently. Let's go ahead and take all of these numbers and multiply them. So bring down this 2, multiply 2 and 4 makes 8 times 2 makes 16. 16 times 2 makes 32, and those numbers do add to make an 18. So let's go ahead and put them in there. We know already the answer is going to end up being right. Oops, I rewrote the wrong number. Let's fix that. Change that back to a 6 there. So we know 2 times 16 makes 32, and those add to make 18. You see how it works. We have 16x here, 2x here, and those numbers add to make 18x. So we got our answer. So again, x plus 18 or x plus 16 and times by x plus 2 is exactly the same as x plus 2 times x plus 16. Let's take a look at the next one. Another positive c term. So that means that we have the same sign. And what makes it the same? It's that plus sign right there. So let's go ahead and draw our two sets of parentheses. Starting off with our x and x make x squared. We already know that the outside terms and inside terms are adding together, but this time they're making a negative number. If they make a negative, that means both signs must be negative. So now we just need the numbers that multiply to make the 45. So let's see what we got here. Well, first number here is that comes to my mind are 9 times by 5. 9 times by 5 makes 45. Now, do those numbers add to make 14? Yes, they do. So we've got the right numbers. 9 and 5. Got it on the first try there. So we can go ahead and, almost looks like a negative 9 there, so let me erase that. And so we can go ahead and check those outside terms. We know those numbers make a negative 5x. You know the negative 9 and x make a negative 9x, and those numbers do add together to make a negative 14x. So it works. And look at the last term. See, the same sign cancel out, make it positive 45 there. So we go ahead and write those numbers in our answer box. X minus 9 times by x minus 5. Let's take a look at the last one here. Here we have another plus sign for that last term. So that tells us that we have the same sign again. Well, if we have the same sign, that means that we can figure out what that sign is by looking at the middle term. So let's see what it is. We know that the outer and inner are adding together to make the negative 12. Well, that means they both have to be negatives again. So let's go ahead and put those in there. X times x makes x squared. We know that two negatives will multiply to make a positive and add to make a negative. Well, let's try the different numbers that we think of that multiply to make 20. 4 and 5, those multiply to make 20. But do they add to make 12? No, they don't. So, again, you can do that same trick. You might already know the other set of numbers, but let's break this 4 down to 2 times 2 times by 5. You see, you could regroup it. Bring down the 2, combine the 2 and the 5, that makes 10. 2 times 10 makes 20. And do those add to make 12? They certainly do. So you see how it works. And again, see how the negative 2, negative 10 multiply to make that positive 20. Check the outside terms. That makes a negative 10x. Inside terms make a negative 2x. And those add together to make a negative 12x. So it does end up matching what we have here. Well, let's go ahead and write that in our answer column, and we are done. X minus 2 times by an x minus 10. And again, that commutative property of multiplication allows us to switch those two binomials. So if you had x minus 10 times x minus 2, it's the same answer. Good luck on tonight's homework.